Welcome to the Consumer and Business Update. Now, here's your host, Barry Foster.
Well, thank you, and we're delighted to have Jim Kallinger, who is not only the founder, but also the chairman of the Small Business and Consumers Alliance and president of the National Association of Former State Legislators. Jim, good to have you with us, my friend.
Glad to be here, Barry. Thank you for having me.
Let's do a little bit of Jim Kallinger 101. You are a former state representative, are you not?
That's correct, Barry. I was in the Florida House of Representatives many years ago, about 20 years ago. Represented the Orlando area, and I'm still, somewhat involved with that process. But I'm glad I was there. Great experience, but I'm also glad to be out of it as well.
For a while, you had an initiative to save my Constitution. What was that all about?
Yeah, so Florida has a Constitution Revision Commission that meets every 20 years. And I don't know if you remember, this was back in 2018. This group came together, so they're unelected, and they propose amendments to our Florida Constitution. And again, an unelected body, and they came together, and I think there were 8 amendments that they proposed. And each of those amendments had 3 to 4 issues in them. So, we were talking 25, 30 issues that were jammed into 8 amendments that were on our ballots, very deceiving. And so I pulled together a group of former state legislators, and we opposed the amendments that this group was proposing because we felt they were dangerous. Most of the issues were not even constitutional in nature. They were statutory, which means they should have been in the statute books, which is a good place to put them, because if there's ever a problem, the legislature, our representatives can go in there and they can amend and correct and, kind of deal with it. But when it gets put into our state constitution, it's in there. And the only way to get it out would be to do another amendment to actually remove it. So we pulled this group together called Save My Constitution. It was about 20 former state legislators. We held some press conferences. We got some good media hits out there to get our message out. And again, our goal was to save our Constitution, the Florida Constitution, and prevent this unelected body from having any success with their proposed amendments, which were really not good for the state of Florida.
I actually do remember this, and I did not realize that was you, but thank you for your work on that. That was no small amount of effort to hold that back, and it really made the free state of Florida kind of what it is today, or kept it from going in another direction. Now in real life, you're in construction, is that right?
Yeah, I'm a state certified general contractor. I've had my license since 1987. I don't know how many years that is, but it's a lot. And so I still get involved with some projects around the state, some smaller stuff. But yes, I am a state certified general contractor.
Now, in my research, and I'm dying to know about this, it says that you're a patent holder. What kind of patent, what kind of invention did you devise to get a patent on?
Okay, so I am a stamp collector. There's not many of us left.
You're a philatelist.
I don't like using that word because it sounds funny. I started as a child collecting stamps, and I still do to this day. And so I invented and patented a product to preserve postage stamps, but collectible postage stamps for collectors. And then you could take these preserved stamps, they were like in little cases, and you would store your most valuable stamps that you collected, because most collectors will have hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of stamps. You pick out your most valuable stamps, and you could encase them in these protective cases that I invented, and I got a patent on it. A lot of hard work, and not an easy process to get a patent. You have to really prove that your idea is unique And I think I was 9 million, somewhere in the 9 million numbers when I got my patent. So, there's over 9 million patents, and the patent office makes sure that you're not replicating anything that anybody else had invented since the founding of our nation. And so I got a patent, and a very unique patent, and one that probably most people would never even see or heard of, but if you're a stamp collector, you probably heard of it.
Well, nicely done. Nicely done. So what persuaded you, or what was the driving force behind the creation of the Small Business and Consumer Alliance?
Okay. Yeah, thanks for asking that, Barry. So, you have, the Chamber of Commerce, and, those are, medium to big companies. And so they're represented by the Florida Chamber. You have the National Federation of Independent Business, and those are, probably small to medium-sized businesses. You have an organization called Associated Industries, and they represent, the mega corporations that are based here in Florida. So you have all these organizations that represent business interests at the state capitol, issues that, involve, state laws. But there's one group that really doesn't have a voice. And so our group is called the Small Business and Consumers Alliance. And so we advocate for the very small business owners. These are, the painting contractor that, might have 2 or 3 employees, or, the small plumbing outfit that might have just, a father son that goes out and does the plumbing. So we represent the very small businesses, literally the mom and pop. Mom and pop are running it, and sometimes it's just mom and pop that are doing all the work. And they're not really represented very well at our Capitol. So our group represents them, and so we advocate and testify on issues at the state Capitol that a very small business owner would have an interest in. So that's our niche.
Well, I noticed that the mission statement, if you will, is to remove obstacles to small businesses, and the obstacles to small businesses these days are just legion. I mean, do you have those prioritized and things you're trying to knock off first to try to make it easier for mom and pop to keep their shop open?
Yeah, and Barry, really, right now the main focus, and probably the main focus every year, is what we call lawsuit abuse. And when you're a very small business, you just have to roll with the punches and kind of take what comes at you, and how you deal with it is really going to come out of your pocket. And then eventually your consumers, people that, that buy your service or your product. And you can't really absorb that. If you're a bigger business or medium sized business, you get some of the stuff that comes down the road, and you just kind of absorb it into your business operations. And it's really, not that big. I mean, it's a big deal, but not a real big deal. That's going to, potentially put you out of business, or put you in a situation where you have to raise your prices so much to pay for that your customers just don't want your services anymore. So it's kind of a life or death situation for these real small business owners to deal with a lot of this stuff. If you're a little bit bigger, you kind of, like I said, absorb into your, your daily operations. But so so for a small, mom and pop, I mean, lawsuit reform is huge. And in a lot of cases, it's those issues that'll put somebody out of business, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, mom and pop don't have very deep pockets, but as you know, as a legislator, under the governmental definition, some what we would consider to be pretty big businesses are still considered as a small business, like a car dealership, a local car dealership, for instance. A lot of people would think, they bring in a lot of money, but they, in the grand scheme of things, are still kind of a small business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's how you define that. And actually, I don't know if there's really a clear definition for a small business, but for us, like you said, we represent the real small guys, the guys that are just, the owner and a couple employees. That's who we advocate for.
Do you find that maybe this third party lawsuit financing, we talked with Randy Ray a little bit about that, but is that something that small businesses have to deal with, or is it more like Americans with Disability Act, things that cost them so much money that it almost makes it cost prohibitive for them to do business?
Yeah, well, both. I mean, the ADA compliance, and I did a lot of that as a contractor. And you'd actually have some of these attorneys have people go into say a small restaurant, and they go in the bathroom to see if there's grab bars in the bathroom. And if there are, then they measure, and if the grab bars are half inch too high or half inch too low, that they will sue the company for not being in compliance with the American for Disabilities Act. Well, that small restaurant with 3 employees, they're facing a lawsuit, and they'll typically settle, out of court, but even that settlement's going to potentially put them out of business. So that's a huge issue that's been ongoing. But the third party financing is something fairly new that the legislature is just really now starting to address. And so what's happening is, and this sounds like unreal, but this is actually a for real situation. But you have investors that are actually providing capital for lawsuits. So they're basically betting on a lawsuit. And so somebody that might get sued for a certain situation, but they don't have the resources to file that lawsuit, they'll get an investor that they'll look at that case and go, wow, it looks like this guy probably can win this case, and not only win it, but win it big. In other words, like kind of a windfall type situation. So they'll actually provide the money for that plaintiff to file a lawsuit. But the problem is, that third party then has like contractual control over that litigant, that plaintiff. And if that plaintiff wants to settle, then that third party says, no, we don't want to settle. We want to drag this thing out and, really raise the cost of, the lawsuit because we want a bigger payout. And so even if the plaintiff wants to settle, this third party will not want to do that. They just want to drag it out. And it's just, what does that do? It raises, the actual eventual settlement in the case, which means, somebody's got to pay for it, which is going to be the insurance company. Insurance company provides insurance for that small business owner. So they pay that insurance company a premium. Well, their premium is going to go up. Next thing you know, that small business owner can no longer afford their premiums. Their insurance company drops them, and then they're in a real situation where, unfortunately, a lot of times they just go out of business. So, third-party financing is kind of a new phenomenon, if you want to call it that. And the legislature is just starting to see the reality of it. And it's crazy when you think about it. And what's even crazier, there's even evidence that some foreign nations are actually financing these lawsuits, pitting American against American, which is unfortunate. But yeah, these third-party financing stuff that's going on, that's something that we're looking at, and probably the session coming up, we'll probably be involved with advocating and testifying on that issue, really trying to help our representatives understand that issue and put some brakes on it.
So let me ask you, Jim, where is the money going? Is it going to the attorneys? Is it going to the payout? Is it going to the insurance companies? I mean, the money ultimately is going someplace. Who are the ones that stand to benefit from this?
Well, so the plaintiff will have an attorney. The plaintiff hires an attorney, and while the plaintiff's like, well, I can't afford an attorney. Well, this third party financer says, well, don't worry about it. We'll pay the attorney for you. So now you're like, oh, well, what the heck? Somebody's going to pay for my attorney that I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to file this lawsuit. So they help the plaintiff pay for that attorney. But then once they get involved, they want that lawsuit to escalate and they want that settlement to grow because they get a return on that. So when they help that plaintiff pay for their attorney, there's an agreement that they sign. So, okay, we'll help, pay your attorney to file the lawsuit, but we want, 50% of the settlement or 60% or 80% of the settlement. So there's an agreement. Well, that then creates an incentive for that third party to see that the settlement is as high as possible. So it creates really, not just that plaintiff, being made whole, for whatever the wrong was, but, creating a windfall on top of that, because then that third party is going to reap all those benefits. So it just creates a wrong incentive. We're not opposed to lawsuits. I mean, if somebody's wrong, if somebody's hurt or whatever, you should be able to file a lawsuit and be able to be made whole. But when you have these situations where, in this case, third parties that are really driving up, the eventual settlement at the end of the case, that's wrong. Because and what's really sad is that plaintiff doesn't even see, half the settlement because it's paid to that third party that financed that person getting an attorney in the first place. So I don't know if that makes sense, Barry, but I'm just, it sounds complicated, but it really isn't. But it's a dangerous precedent that drives up settlements and lawsuits, which drives up insurance rates, which we all pay for. And for small business, can be devastating. And the small business, what they do is they pass on, if they have to pay more for insurance, they pass it on to the cost of their product. So at the end of the day, the consumers pay for it.
Well, there's the old story about the two farmers having an argument about a cow. One pulled on the head and the other pulled on the tail. And while they were pulling, the lawyer milked the cow. So,
yeah.
and I think that there's a lot of truth to that. Now, as the president of the National Association of Former State Legislators, have you been able to get a group together that may still know people and know how the system works to begin to affect some kind of change here?
Well, so the National Association of Former State Legislators is what the name implies. It's an organization of former state legislators. It's national, so we have members from around the country. Our members are former legislators, but we don't get into any policy issues. This organization, so everything we're talking about here, lawsuit, abuse, and all that other stuff, the National Association of Former State Legislators does not get involved in policy issues. What we do is we advocate for state sovereignty. There's a lot of issues that the national government gets involved with that are really state issues. And so we try to, make that clear. We try to, show where that line is, the role, the authority, and the purview of the national government, and what's the role and the purview and the authority of the state governments. And that's very clearly laid out in the Constitution. But unfortunately, those lines have become blurred, especially in the last 100 years or so. And so we're just trying to we're trying to educate former state legislators who then educate current state legislators and advise them on how they, again, not policy, but, just keep your eyes and ears open and understand, your role as a state legislator, your state's role in a federal government. So when we say federal government, a lot of people think, well, that's Washington. Well, no, federal government, as the founders created and defined, the federal government is a consensual agreement between the national government and the state governments. So we have a federal government, which includes not only the national, but the state governments. And, what's each's role in that process. We just try to, make that clear to those who are current state legislators through former state legislators.
We're talking with Jim Kallinger, who's the founder and chairman of the Small Business and Consumer Alliance and also president of the National Association of Former State Legislators. Jim, we've talked about the mom and pop shops, but another thing that has driven up costs tremendously is this whole situation with medical malpractice insurance and suing doctors not only for maybe damages, but also pain and suffering. Have you guys delved into that area as well?
Yeah, we have. So, a little history, like you mentioned earlier, I served in the legislature many years ago, 20 years ago. And, back then, lawsuit, we call it law, they call it tort reform back then. Now we call it lawsuit reform, but, just legislation dealing with lawsuit abuse. There was a lot of stuff that was going on back then. And a lot of it dealt with medical malpractice. There was a big battle going on between the docs and the attorneys. And so the legislature, filed and passed some good, meaningful legislation dealing with medical malpractice. Unfortunately, so it went through the House and the Senate. In fact, I sponsored a couple of the bills. The governor signed it. And then the Supreme Court back then, the Florida Supreme Court, they struck it down. And so they basically were legislating from the bench. They were not respecting what I would call the will of the people, because, we're a republic, so we have representatives. So our state representatives, they represent us. And as constituents, we communicate and we let them know that we need to put some reforms in place to deal with lawsuit abuse. And so the legislature acted accordingly. It passed some meaningful medical malpractice legislation, and the Florida Supreme Court struck it down. So that was 20 years ago. Today, we have a Florida Supreme Court that is not so activist. They respect the role of the three branches of government. And so when the people speak through their elected representatives and they pass legislation, they pretty much respect that. Now, they do check it for, if it's constitutional in nature, according to the Florida Constitution, they will intervene as needed. But so we now have a Florida Supreme Court that's more what I call strict constructionist. And so this has opened up an opportunity for our elected representatives, the legislature, to push forth some meaningful reforms on lawsuit abuse, which they have done. And one of them, and you mentioned it, is medical malpractice. That's been an issue that's bubbled up. And the issue with medical malpractice is if it's not dealt with properly, and this happened 20 years ago, it just drives up the cost of medical insurance or malpractice insurance that doctors have to carry. I'm talking hundreds of thousands of dollars a year premium for a doctor to have medical malpractice insurance, because the potential of getting sued and then the settlement just being a gigantic number. So of course the insurance companies have to cover for that. So that was a big issue 20 years ago. 2 or 3 years ago, they passed some good medical malpractice lawsuit reform issues. Well, the attorneys aren't going to give up. So this past session, they put forth a bill that dealt with medical malpractice, and more in particular, the pain and suffering issue that you're talking about. And economic damages is pretty clear cut. Everybody should be made whole. If a doctor does something wrong, or there's an error, you should have the right to, make yourself whole and, claim those economic benefits. And, there's that's very clear and cut dry. But when you get into pain and suffering, that's very subjective. And, but we do have pain and suffering. So you can sue a doctor for pain and suffering. You as the individual can do that. And so what happened this past session is the attorneys were pushing to extend pain and suffering, not just to the actual patient, the person that was, quote, hurt, but to extended family members. If you filed a lawsuit for medical malpractice because, say something happened between you and your doctor, you sue for economic damages, you sue for pain and suffering damages. But if this bill were to pass that the governor vetoed, but if that were to pass, not only could you sue for pain and suffering, but your wife could, your children could, your aunt, your uncle could sue for pain and suffering. I mean, it would just open up a Pandora's box, and these lawsuits would just go absolutely crazy. So the bill actually made it through the legislature, and then there was a lot of opposition to it. In fact, there was an amendment that would cap pain and suffering to $1 million. That was rejected. So it's just open-ended pain and suffering. Not only the plaintiff, but extended family members could sue for pain and suffering. It got to the governor's desk, and thank goodness he vetoed it. But it just shows, that issue was pretty much settled, but it bubbled back up, and we're going to see, where the attorneys are going to keep pushing that envelope, pushing the envelope. And if we're not vigilant, we the people, for our elected representatives, if we're not vigilant, they're going to keep, trying to, push the stuff, which, it's like the third party financing. I mean, it just enriches the attorneys, and unfortunately not a lot of benefit for the actual plaintiffs. They kind of get pinched out of all this stuff. And again, it boils down to, medical malpractice. That's our doctors and our nurses and, clinics and hospitals. You start letting this stuff get out of control, and you think our health insurance is high right now. I mean, the doctor's health and your medical malpractice insurance rates are high right now. If this were to go through, that would skyrocket, and that would have, and this happened 20 years ago, we have doctors leaving our state, because they just couldn't afford paying the insurance premium. So it's kind of this, it's a lot of moving parts out there, and we just have to keep our eyes and ears open. It doesn't go away. You might have, success or victory in one area, but something else pops up that, it's like the whack-a-mole. Things pop up, you just have to keep your eyes and ears open. If not, bad things can and will happen.
Well, Jim, the legislature has just wrapped up the state budget. I think it was $115 million, but you did get a victory of sorts into this property tax cut that's going to be able to help the mom and pop and the small businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. That was, So the budget was passed finally, and I knew they would get it done. The extended session. The budget's not due out. It has to be completed by July 1st. That's the beginning of the fiscal year for our state. So as long as they have the work done before July 1st, everything was fine. And a lot of people were, complaining like, oh, they extended the session, they didn't get the budget done. They still had a couple months before July 1st to get it done. They got it done. I think it was a healthy debate. The whole issue was tax cuts, and if they're hung up on tax cuts, that's a good thing for us. And so they were talking a sales tax cut, they were talking a property tax cut. This is between the House and the Senate, and I think they're going to continue to have that debate. So we did not make any progress on property or sales tax cuts. But that's okay. The debate has started, the discussion has started, and I'm confident that's going to come up next session. And maybe next year we're going to see some good progress in those areas, and that's only good for us. But the one area that they agreed on was actually eliminating the business rent tax. So if you're an individual and you rent an apartment, $800 a month, $1,000 a month, you pay the rent, $800 to $1,000 a month. if you are a business, so say you are a, think of a little mom and pop operation. So they have a little restaurant and they want to rent some space. So it's, 3,000 square foot restaurant space, and the rent is say $5,000 a month. Well, they got to pay a tax on top of that $5,000 a month. So that's a cost incurred by the small business. And say in this case, a small restaurant, well, they pass that on to their customer, and the price of their food's going to be a little bit higher to make up for that, to pay for that rent that business owner is paying to have that space for the restaurant. So the legislature eliminated the business rent tax, which I think is huge. And, again, especially for the small business people that we represent, you get the bigger companies, you get the, we're talking restaurants, you get, Sonny's barbecue restaurant, they probably own all their restaurants, but if they were to rent a space, they easily absorb whatever that tax is. But if you're a small mom and pop and it's you and your wife that operate a small restaurant, and you're paying the tax on the rent that you're paying to have that restaurant space, that affects your bottom line in a pretty significant way. And so we are very, very happy that they eliminated the business rent tax. And it's just, and the thing is, Barry, and I think we got so used to it as just being, the cost of doing business. We're the only state until now that paid rent or paid tax on business rent. Out of all 50 states, we were the only one that was still doing that. And again, I think it was just kind of an oversight. It's like, wow, it's just the cost of doing business, and people weren't thinking much of it. But it's a huge victory for the small business owner. It's a huge victory for consumers that go to the restaurants, that hire the painter, whatever it is. It was a big story, and we're thrilled that was eliminated, and we're very confident that this debate on property and sales tax will continue, and maybe next session we'll see some huge movement in that area that will benefit all of us.
So, Jim, the SBCA has been going on for what, about a year now, or are you starting to get some traction?
Wait, say it again. I missed that.
The Small Business and Consumer Alliance, you've been going on for about a year now. Are you picking up traction now?
Yeah, we are. So we got engaged really for the first time this past session, where we advocated and did some testifying this last session. We're going to start getting more involved. We're just trying to, let folks know that we're out there. We do have right now a Facebook page that you can follow. Just see the issues that we're involved with. So you just go to Facebook and, type in Small Business and Consumers Alliance, and you can check out our Facebook. And so we're just starting off small. We know it's the right thing to do. We know there's a niche of these small guys that are really struggling, and we're just trying to be a voice for them. And we just see we see us growing. I mean, there are a lot and a lot of small business owners out there, and they just feel left out. They don't belong to the chamber. They don't belong to NFIB. They're not in associated industries. They're just kind of out there. Well, now they have a voice, and we're just trying to get the word out that, hey guys, we're here for you, and we'll stand up for you as needed, and do the right thing. So yeah, we're starting to grow. We've been around for about a year, and I think we're just going to get bigger and bigger. Bigger and bigger meaning, we're going to get more and more involved as time goes on.
And more members of the alliance. Where are you pulling your members from? Members, small business, mom and pop organizations saying, "Hey, it's nice to have somebody we'll throw in with this." Are you getting citizens? Are you getting lawyers? I mean, do you have any kind of analytics on where the people are coming in from?
Yeah, we're just getting word out to small business as we can. And again, it's one thing if you're dealing with a medium to big company, there's so many medium to big companies in the state of Florida, 10,000. But when you're talking, super small business owners like us, you're probably talking 100,000, and we're trying to find the needles in the haystack, and just reaching out and connecting and letting them know that we're there. And so that's how we're gaining our membership, one person at a time, so to speak. And then also, reaching out, like for your radio show, your listeners, they're aware of us now, and which is good. So they might know, they might have an uncle that has a small landscaping business. They can say, hey, I listened to this radio show, and there's this group called the Small Business Consumers Alliance. You ought to check them out. And so they can start following us on Facebook, and we can start, getting engaged with folks that way.
Jim, is there anything that the Small Business and Consumer Alliance needs at this point? I mean, you need more members, you need money, you need cards and letters giving you well wishes. Are there things that you guys need that'll help this move forward?
Yeah, I mean, this is right now more of a labor of love. Of course, we could use finances to, have more of a presence. We could, Barry, just you having me on your radio show is huge. That's helping to get the word out. And, I think at some point we're going to reach critical mass. And at that point, maybe a little bit more formalization on, the financial end of it. But right now, we're just trying to be that voice. And, we feel, the whole, if you build it, they'll come, whatever that was. Remember that movie?
The Field of Dreams. If we build it, they will come. Yes.
Yeah. So that's what we're doing. We're building it. And we believe as word gets out, like through your radio show, those members will come, that support will come. And so that's where we are. We're committed to this. It's very important. These folks are just not being represented, so we're just being a voice for them. And we're glad to do it. It's the right thing to do, and it'll grow. It'll grow.
Jim, you're doing a great work. If you want to find out more, go up on your Facebook account and just do a search for Small Business and Consumer Alliance. You'll find it all right there. All questions will be answered. And Jim, I'd like to have you back on the show at some time, talk a little bit more about this third-party financing, which I find both fascinating and disturbing. So I'd like to have you back at some time if you're free to do that.
That'd be great, Barry, and I'm pretty sure that'll be an issue coming up this next legislative session. So it's a topic, and it will become a hot topic the closer we get to session. We'd love to talk to you about it.
Jim Kallinger, founder and chairman of the Small Business and Consumer Alliance. You've been listening to Consumer and Business Update, and this is Barry Foster, and we'll see you next time.